In every corner of the world, there are untold stories of dignity tested, of courage revealed, and of moments that change everything. Here at True Echo, we bring you real, powerful narratives that echo through time, stories where justice meets courage, and the underdog rises against all odds. Today's story will make you question everything you thought you knew about strength, respect, and the human spirit. My name is James Washington. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 2 decades, I've been living a life so quiet you could almost mistake me for invisible. I work nights, I keep my head down, and I clean floors. That's it. People walk past me every day without thinking twice. And honestly, I've been fine with that. But there are moments, tiny, almost imperceptible moments, when the life you've been hiding from comes rushing back, and you're forced to decide whether to keep running or to turn and face it. For me, that moment came on a Thursday night at a martial arts gym in Denver, the kind of place that prided itself on discipline and hierarchy, but where ego sometimes outshone respect. I was in the middle of mopping up a stubborn stain when I heard the voice. "Hey, you there, cleaning. How about a quick demonstration?" I didn't even look up at first. That voice belonged to Derek Mitchell, the head instructor, a man in his mid-30s with a black belt tied proudly around his waist and a personality that demanded the spotlight. He was standing in the center of the mat, his students gathered around. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, right?" he added, smirking. I kept my head down, scrubbing the mat. "I don't want to bother you, sensei. Just finishing up so you can get back to it." Derek's laugh echoed through the gym, theatrical and loud. "Everyone, look at this. The guy's afraid to even step on the mat." Some of his students laughed nervously, their eyes darting between us. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something they'd never forget. What Derek didn't know, and what I had spent 20 years making sure nobody knew, was that there was a time when my name didn't belong to some invisible janitor. There was a time when the world knew me as Silent Storm Washington, 5-time world mixed martial arts champion. But all that ended in one night, in one tragic accident that took away more than my career. It took away a friend, my drive, and my belief that I had the right to fight again. Derek stepped closer, his grin widening. "Come on, just a little demonstration. Show my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans." Something stirred in me then, something I had buried deep. I looked at him, just for a moment, and he hesitated. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "All right," I said finally, setting the mop aside. "But when we're done, you're going to apologize to them for turning this mat into a circus." Derek's smirk twitched into something tighter, almost a smile, almost a sneer. "Apologize," he repeated, laughing just a little too loudly. "You're going to be the one apologizing to the floor when you meet it." I didn't rise to the bait. Not yet. The students shifted, curiosity pulling them closer. 8 of them in total, 4 wearing white belts, 3 with blue, and 1 young woman with a purple belt. She stood out instantly, not just because she seemed the most serious in the room, but because she wasn't laughing. Her dark eyes flicked between Derek and me with something like concern. The truth was, I hadn't stepped on a mat in over 2 decades. Not since the night Tony "Hammer" Rodriguez died because of me. At least, that's what I had told myself all these years. The official report called it an accident. I knew better. I knew the anger, the pressure, the need to prove something had driven me to push harder than I should have. And when Tony's head hit the mat at the wrong angle, the life left his eyes before the referee even knelt beside him. From that moment on, I swore I'd never fight again. Never step into a ring. Never give myself the chance to lose control. And yet, here I was. "Sensei," the young woman, the purple belt, spoke up suddenly. "Maybe we could just continue class." "It's late, Anne." "Sarah Chun," Derek cut her off sharply, his voice hard. Are you questioning my teaching methods? She swallowed, then shook her head, but the look in her eyes stayed. I knew that look. I'd seen it in my sister Kesha's eyes every time she'd watched me take a hit I didn't deserve and refuse to back down. That look said, "This isn't right. But I can't stop it. Everyone, gather around," Derek commanded. "You're about to see a practical demonstration of why there's a hierarchy in martial arts. Why respect is earned, not given. And why some people should remember their place." His words weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. I stepped onto the mat slowly, deliberately, feeling every fiber of the surface beneath my shoes. The smell of sweat, rubber, and detergent hit me hard. Memories flashed, crowds roaring, gloves tightening around my fists, the metallic tang of adrenaline in my mouth. I could almost hear Tony's voice in my ear, telling me to keep my guard up. Derek circled me like a predator sizing up prey. "So, Janitor," he said loudly for everyone to hear, "you think you can hold a basic guard? Or is that too complicated for someone who only knows how to push 'em up?" The laughter came again, nervous, awkward, but still laughter. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in slow and deep. Not because I was angry, but because I wanted control. The old me, the one who lived and died in the ring, didn't think about control. He reacted. He fought. He ended things. Not tonight. When I opened my eyes again, Derek was right in front of me, leaning in with a smirk. "What's the matter? Scared?" he pressed. "No," I said evenly. "Just wondering if you're going to regret this in front of your students, or after they've left." That hit a nerve. I saw his jaw tighten. And then he made his first mistake, he pushed me. Lightly, but enough to make a point. Enough to tell the room, "See? I can move him whenever I want." But I didn't move. Not an inch. It wasn't force that kept me rooted, it was control. Years of planting my feet in every fight, every spar, every grueling training session had made my base solid. Derek's palm met something that might as well have been a wall. His smirk faltered. "Interesting," I murmured, more to myself than to him. That one word made him uneasy. I could see it. He didn't understand what was happening, but his instincts, the ones every fighter develops, were whispering that something wasn't right. And he ignored them. "Did you hear that, guys?" he barked, trying to recover. "He thinks it's interesting. Let's show him what real technique looks like." The room had shifted. It was subtle, but I could feel it. The students weren't just curious anymore, they were watching me. Studying me. And they could sense that I wasn't what I seemed. Sarah's eyes had narrowed slightly, like she was putting something together. I took one step forward. Derek, without thinking, stepped back. It was small. Almost invisible. But everyone who noticed understood what it meant. The black belt was retreating. "Problem?" I asked quietly. He shook his head too quickly. "No problem. Just, admiring your posture." "You learned that from YouTube?" Nobody laughed. "Las Vegas National Gym," I said simply. He frowned. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. Sarah's phone was already out, her fingers moving fast over the screen. Her expression froze, her eyes going wide. I knew she'd found me. Sarah didn't say anything right away. She just stared at me, her phone screen glowing faintly in her hand. The way her eyes flicked up to meet mine told me she knew exactly who I was. Derek, oblivious, adjusted his belt with a flourish. "Well, whatever boot camp you went to in Vegas, it won't help you here." He turned to the students, spreading his arms like a showman. "Everyone, watch closely. You're about to see why years of training beat whatever this guy has." The confidence in his voice was still there, but it wasn't pure anymore, it was stretched thin, like a drum skin about to split. I let my arms hang loosely at my sides. No guard, no stance, nothing to suggest I was preparing for a fight. That, more than anything, seemed to bother him. Fighters like Derek needed their opponent to meet them in the middle, to trade stances and telegraph intent. Without that, they were fighting shadows. Last chance, I said quietly. Apologize to your students for turning this into a circus. Apologize to her, I nodded toward Sarah, for dismissing her voice. And apologize to yourself for forgetting what martial arts is supposed to be. It was an out. A clean one. He could have taken it. Instead, he attacked. The first jab came fast, faster than most people could follow, but I saw it long before it landed. His right shoulder twitched, just slightly, giving me all the warning I needed. I slid to my left, his fist cutting through empty space. His eyes widened, but he didn't slow down. Jab, cross, hook, his favorite combination. I'd seen 1,000 men throw it, and I'd beaten every one. I dipped under the jab, leaned back from the cross, and took a single step out of range of the hook. Each move was small, efficient, and gave him nothing to grab onto. Clean technique, I murmured as I moved. Adequate speed. But you're leaving your left side wide open. The comment hit him harder than any punch would have. He swung again, this time with a kick aimed at my ribs. It was fast, snappy, technically correct. But all it took was a slight shift of my weight and the kick found air. Now he was breathing heavier. Stop dancing and fight, he barked, frustration creeping into his voice. But this wasn't dancing, it was control. Control of space, control of rhythm, control of him. His next attack was wild, a desperate combination of punches and kicks meant to overwhelm. I let him commit to it, every missed strike pulling him further out of position. And when he finally stopped, his chest heaving, I was right there in front of him, close enough to touch. Derek, I said softly, do you know the difference between someone who learns to fight in a controlled gym, and someone who learns in the ring? He didn't answer. I placed my palm lightly against his chest. No shove, no punch, just a precise push timed with the moment his weight shifted wrong. He flew. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. It was worse. The students gasped as he was lifted off his feet and thrown back almost 2 meters, landing hard on his back. The impact echoed through the gym. For a moment, no one moved. Derek lay there, staring at the ceiling. His mind was trying to catch up to what had just happened. There was no pain, only shock, the kind that seeps into your bones when you realize you've been completely outmatched. That's impossible, he muttered. Not impossible, I said, walking toward him. Just physics. Leverage, timing, energy transfer. Things you learn after a couple decades of real fights. I offered him my hand. He ignored it and stood on his own, wobbling slightly. 2 decades in what? He demanded. Before I could answer, Sarah's voice cut through the silence. You really don't know who he is, do you? Everyone turned to her. James Washington, she said, holding up her phone for all to see. Also known as Silent Storm. 5-time world MMA champion. Retired undefeated after a 22-year career. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The color drained from Derek's face. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. You, he started, but I stopped him with a raised hand. Would you have treated me with respect if you'd known my name? I asked quietly. Or would you still have mocked the janitor who couldn't fight back? The question hung there, heavier than any punch I could throw. Derek didn't answer. His lips parted like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. The gym was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. I could see the questions in his eyes. Not about whether Sarah was telling the truth, he knew she was, but about how someone who had once stood at the top of the fighting world could be standing in front of him now, holding a mop. I didn't know," he finally stammered. "If you had known," I asked again, stepping closer, "would it have changed anything? Would you have spoken to me differently?" He swallowed hard. "Yes. Of course I cut him off." "Then you missed the point. Because the next janitor you talk to? He might not be a 5-time champion. He might just be a man trying to earn a living. And he'd still deserve your respect." The words landed heavier than the throw had. His gaze dropped to the mat, his ego folding in on itself. Behind him, Sarah took a step forward. "Sensei," she said, her voice firm, "I've been training here for 2 years. I came here because I believed you could teach me discipline, respect, and skill. But what I saw tonight wasn't teaching. It was bullying." A few of the other students nodded, their expressions shifting from confusion to agreement. One of the blue belts looked down at the floor, shame creeping into his face as if he'd just realized how many times he'd laughed along with the jokes. Derek looked around at them, his jaw tightening. I didn't mean." "You meant to make yourself look stronger," Sarah interrupted. "And you thought putting someone else down was the way to do it. That's not strength. That's weakness." I watched him flinch at her words. Sarah wasn't speaking loudly, but her voice carried the kind of conviction that couldn't be ignored. "Apologies," Derek said suddenly, the word tumbling out. He looked at me, then Sarah, then the rest of the class. "I apologize, to all of you. I was wrong." I gave him a small nod. "Good start. But change isn't in the words, it's in what you do after." He looked back at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes before. Not respect, not yet, but understanding. The beginnings of it, at least. Then Sarah, to my surprise, turned to me. "Mr. Washington, would you ever consider teaching again? Because I think we could all learn a lot more from someone who understands that true strength comes with responsibility." For the first time that night, I felt a real smile tug at my lips. Not the polite, guarded smiles I'd given strangers for years, but the kind I hadn't worn since before Tony died. "Maybe," I said. "But if I do, it won't be about punches or kicks. It'll be about what keeps you standing when the fight's over." The class was still silent, but the energy had shifted. This wasn't Derek's stage anymore. It wasn't mine either. The power in the room now belonged to the idea that something bigger than belts or titles defined a fighter. Derek looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he just nodded. In that moment, I thought it might end there, a humiliating night for him, a strange resurrection for me. But what I didn't know was that this night wasn't just a lesson for Derek. It was the start of something that would change the gym forever. Because the next morning, there'd be a video. And by the end of the week, everyone in the martial arts community would see it. And Derek Mitchell's world would never be the same again. The gym felt different the next day. I came in at my usual time, late in the evening, when most people were gone, expecting to sweep the floors in silence. But the moment I stepped inside, the hum of conversation stopped. Heads turned. A few students whispered to each other, glancing at me, then quickly looking away like they'd been caught doing something wrong. It didn't take long to figure out why. Sarah was sitting on one of the benches near the wall, her phone in hand. When she saw me, she stood up and walked over. "Mr. Washington," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "I should probably tell you, that video I took last night, it's already out there." My stomach tightened. "Video?" She nodded. "I recorded the whole thing. I didn't plan to post it at first, but, after what happened, I felt like people needed to see it. Not just for you, for everyone who's been humiliated in a place that's supposed to teach respect." I took a slow breath, feeling a dozen pairs of eyes on us. "How many people have seen it?" She hesitated. "About 300,000. Since this morning. 300,000. That number hit harder than any punch. I'd spent 2 decades trying to disappear, to make sure the world forgot about James Silent Storm Washington. And now, with the swipe of a finger, my name was back on people's lips. Is Derek in today? I asked. Sarah nodded. He came in early. Been hiding in the office ever since. Half the students from last night didn't show up today. Some of the ones who did were asking for refunds. I glanced toward the office door. The blinds were drawn, but I could see a shadow moving inside, pacing. Derek had always loved the sound of his own voice. Now, he had nothing to say. The truth was, I didn't want revenge. Not in the way people might think. I'd already lived through the highs and lows of public humiliation. I knew it could destroy a person. But I also knew that sometimes, losing everything you think defines you is the only way to see what actually matters. Leave him be, I told Sarah. If he's got any sense, he'll figure out what to do next. She tilted her head. And if he doesn't? Then life will teach him the hard way. For the rest of my shift, I worked in silence. The murmurs around me faded as people left for the night. But as I locked up the equipment room, I heard a voice behind me. James. I turned. Derek stood there, shoulders hunched, a shadow of the man who had strutted across the mat the night before. His eyes were red, lack of sleep, maybe shame. I wanted to talk, he said. I nodded once. Then talk. He swallowed hard. I've been in this business for 15 years. Thought I knew what it meant to be a sensei. Thought the belt meant I'd earned respect. But watching that video, seeing the comments. His voice cracked just a little. They weren't just criticizing me, they were right. I've been an arrogant, insecure jerk. I didn't answer right away. Sometimes silence makes people speak the truth they've been holding back. I want to make it right, he said finally. Not just with you. With the whole class. Then you've got work to do, I said. Words are cheap. Change is expensive. He nodded slowly. Would you help me? Not with fighting, God knows I'm not teaching you anything there. But with being better. Leading better. That caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness, maybe excuses. Not this. I'll think about it, I said, turning toward the door. For now, focus on showing your students the kind of man you want them to be. When I stepped out into the night air, the city felt different. Not louder, not busier, just sharper. Like the edges of the past I'd kept buried were cutting their way back to the surface. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The video was still spreading. People were talking. And sooner or later, the world I'd left behind was going to come looking for me again. By the following week, there was no hiding from it. The video Sarah had uploaded had gone from a few 100,000 views to over 7 million. It was on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, hell, even my niece in Chicago sent me a link without realizing it was me. Headlines blared things like, Black belt humiliated by Janitor, turns out to be legendary MMA champion. Silent Storm returns after 20 years, and teaches a lesson in respect. The footage wasn't flashy. No slow-motion edits, no pumping music. Just raw, uncut video from Sarah's phone. It caught every word, every movement, the insults, the dodges, the final palm strike that sent Derek flying. And then, my name. The comments section was a battlefield. Half the people were celebrating, calling it the greatest display of calm dominance they'd ever seen. The other half argued over whether I should have humiliated Derek the way he humiliated me. But beneath it all, there was one constant thread, curiosity. People wanted to know why James Silent Storm Washington was cleaning mats in a small Denver gym. I'd kept my life small for a reason. Since Tony's death, I'd avoided interviews, old friends, even the fight world itself. I'd worked jobs where nobody asked questions: construction, warehouse, janitorial. My paychecks were modest, my days predictable. And I was fine with that. But now I couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone squinting like they'd seen me before. It wasn't just strangers, either. On Wednesday night, as I was stacking training pads in the equipment closet, Sarah poked her head in. "James, there's someone here asking for you." I frowned. "Asking for me? Not Derek?" She shook her head. "They said they knew you from back in the day. Vegas." My chest tightened. There weren't many people from that part of my life I wanted to see. When I stepped out, I saw him immediately, a tall man in a worn leather jacket, with a nose that had been broken at least 3 times. Marcus Holt. My old coach. "Storm," he said, grinning like no time had passed. "It's James now," I replied. He shrugged. "Always be Storm to me. You didn't think I'd see that video? Whole damn fight community's been passing it around like gospel. You haven't lost a step." I didn't answer. I wasn't going to get pulled into nostalgia. Marcus stepped closer. "Listen. I've got promoters calling me. Big names. They want to see you back in the ring, exhibitions, commentary, training seminars. You could be making more in a weekend than you make here in a year." I shook my head. "Not interested." "Storm," he said, lowering his voice, "I know why you left. We all do. But you can't punish yourself forever for what happened with Tony." His name hit like a hook to the ribs. "This isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about peace. And I'm not trading that for a spotlight." Marcus studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "You can't hide forever. The world's already looking for you." Before I could respond, Derek walked out of the office. He froze when he saw Marcus, then glanced at me. "Friend of yours?" "Old coach," I said. Marcus extended a hand. "You must be the guy who learned humility on the mat last week." Derek took the hit without flinching. "That'd be me. And for the record, I deserved it." I saw something in his face. He meant that. Maybe the fall from grace was starting to take root in him. Still, I knew the weeks ahead would test him. Because when the internet makes you infamous, it doesn't stop at the first scandal. It digs deeper. And if Derek had skeletons in his closet, which most people do, they'd be rattling before long. And me? I had my own ghosts to deal with. I just didn't know they'd be knocking on my door so soon. The knock came late on Friday night. I was in my small apartment above a laundromat, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, trying to read the paper in peace. I wasn't expecting company, and at that hour, unexpected company was rarely good news. When I opened the door, my heart stopped. Standing there was Maria Rodriguez, Tony's sister. She hadn't changed much. The years had etched a few lines around her eyes, but they hadn't dulled the sharpness in her gaze. She was wearing a plain gray coat, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like a woman who didn't waste time on small talk. "James," she said. "Maria," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with everything we'd never said after that night: the hospital, the funeral, the way I'd disappeared without a word. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside, and she walked in, her eyes scanning the small apartment like she was taking stock of the life I'd built since running from the one I destroyed. She didn't sit. I saw the video. Of course she had. Everyone had. "I'm not here to talk about Derek," she continued. "I'm here because my brother's name has been coming up again. People are asking questions. Some of them are ugly questions." My jaw clenched. I didn't start this, Maria. I didn't want the attention. Doesn't matter. You've got it now, she said. And with your face back in the spotlight, people are remembering. Remembering that the last time you fought, someone died. That someone was my brother. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling that old weight settle on my chest. It was an accident. Was it? She shot back, her voice sharp. That one cut deep. Not because I hadn't heard it before, but because it was coming from her. I didn't answer. She sighed, softening just slightly. Look, I didn't come here to drag you through it all again. I came because someone's been digging into Tony's death. Someone who says they have proof it wasn't just an accident. My eyes snapped open. What kind of proof? She shook her head. They wouldn't tell me over the phone. Said they wanted to talk to you directly. Said they'd be in Denver next week. Who are they? Maria hesitated. They wouldn't give a name. Just said they used to be in the fight game. And that you'd remember them. That didn't narrow it down much. My past was full of names I remembered, and more than a few I wished I could forget. Why come to me? I asked. Because whether you like it or not, she said, this is your fight too. If someone's trying to twist what happened, you're the only one who can set it straight. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. And James, if they're telling the truth, if someone really was responsible for what happened to Tony, then you've been carrying the wrong kind of guilt for 20 years. When she was gone, I stood there in the quiet, staring at the door like it might open again. If she was right, if Tony's death hadn't been what I thought, then the last 2 decades of my life had been built on a lie. And I wasn't sure if that would set me free, or break me all over again. The week crawled by like it knew I was waiting for something I didn't want. Every night at the gym, I could feel the undercurrent of whispers. The students didn't just see me as the janitor anymore, now I was the man from the viral video. Derek kept his distance, though when our eyes met, there was no hostility. Only something quieter. Maybe respect. Maybe fear. By Thursday, my nerves were like a taut wire. I didn't know who this used to be in the fight game contact was, but I knew they were bringing the kind of baggage that could rip open old wounds. The meeting place was a small diner on the edge of downtown, one of those old school joints with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. Maria had chosen it. Said it was neutral ground. When I walked in, I spotted her right away in a booth near the back. She wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a man I hadn't seen in over 20 years. Eddie Russo. Back in the day, Eddie was a fight promoter, not the clean, respectable kind, but the kind who'd sell his own mother if it meant getting a cut of the gate. He was always hanging around locker rooms and backstage areas, looking for fighters he could sweet-talk into deals that somehow always worked in his favor. I hadn't thought about him in years. Now, here he was, older, heavier, his hair gone to silver at the temples. But his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, never still. Storm, he said with a thin smile as I slid into the booth. Been a long time. It's James, I said flatly. He chuckled. Always the humble act. But the truth is, no matter how many floors you mop, you're still the guy who could drop anyone in the second round. Get to the point, I said. Eddie leaned back, studying me. That night in Vegas. Tony's last sparring session. You've been living with the idea that it was your fault. But what if I told you it wasn't? My stomach tightened. I was there, Eddie. I know what I did. Yeah, you threw the shots, he said, nodding. But what you didn't know was that Tony was already compromised before he stepped on the mat. Maria's eyes flicked toward me, searching my reaction. Compromised how? I asked. Eddie lowered his voice. Somebody had paid him to throw a fight earlier that month. He didn't do it, Tony wasn't that kind of guy. But the people who put up the money? They wanted to make an example of him. He'd been getting threats. Real ugly stuff. I stared at him. What does that have to do with the sparring session? Eddie's gaze didn't waver. What if I told you he wasn't healthy that night? That someone made sure of it? That the way he went down wasn't just because of your punch? Maria's hand tightened on her coffee mug. I shook my head. You're saying somebody sabotaged him? In the gym? Eddie leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. Not just in the gym. In the locker room. I've heard whispers for years, but now I've got names. And those names belong to people who are still around, people who don't want you asking questions. I felt a cold, slow burn in my chest. For 20 years, I'd been carrying the guilt of killing my best friend in a moment of lost control. And now this man was telling me maybe, just maybe, that guilt didn't belong to me at all. But if what Eddie was saying was true, it meant Tony didn't just die in an accident. It meant he was murdered. And that was a whole different fight. I stared at Eddie, my pulse pounding in my ears. Names, I said. Eddie's lips curled into a slow, sly smile. You always were direct. Fine. But understand, once you hear them, you can't unhear them. And if you go after them, there's no going back to mopping floors and staying invisible. I'm not here for your dramatics, Eddie. Who? He glanced at Maria, then back at me. Two men. Both still in the fight world. One you know, Cal Richter. My jaw tightened instantly. Cal had been a mid-tier fighter back in my day, never championship material but dangerous enough to be a gatekeeper for anyone trying to climb the ranks. Outside the ring, he was a bully with a temper and a taste for backroom deals. And the other? I pressed. Eddie's eyes narrowed. Viktor Petrov. The name hit like a body shot. Viktor, the demolition man, Petrov, my most brutal opponent, the man I'd beaten for my second world title. He'd been a favorite of shady promoters and underground circles, the kind of fighter who didn't care if his win came from a knockout or from breaking someone's career. I'd heard he'd gone into promotion work overseas after his fighting days ended, running events where the line between sport and street fight blurred. What do they have to do with Tony? I asked. Eddie leaned forward, voice low. Richter and Petrov were in deep with a syndicate out of Vegas. Tony got offered money to take a dive. When he refused, they decided to make sure he paid. The night of your sparring session? Someone slipped something into his water bottle in the locker room. Slowed his reflexes. Made him dizzy. When he took that hit from you, his body couldn't react, couldn't protect itself. The fall, it was inevitable. Maria's voice was tight, shaking. You've been sitting on this for 20 years? Eddie didn't flinch. I didn't have proof until recently. A guy who used to work security for Petrov reached out. Said he couldn't live with it on his conscience anymore. I tried to process it. 20 years of self-blame, of nightmares, of replaying every second of that night, thinking it was my lack of control that killed Tony, only to hear that the deck had been stacked before the fight even began. But Eddie's words weren't a comfort. They were gasoline on a fire I thought I'd put out. Where are they now? I asked. Eddie gave a humorless laugh. Petrov's running high-profile matches in Eastern Europe. Untouchable over there. Richter's closer, runs a chain of gyms here in the States. Denver's one of his stops every few months. Maria's eyes locked on mine. James, if they did this, they need to answer for it. I didn't answer right away. I looked at Eddie. Why bring this to me now? What's in it for you? He smirked. Justice, Storm. And maybe a little payday if the right people hear the truth. I'm not pretending I'm a saint. I stood, sliding out of the booth. I'll think about it. But as I walked out into the cold night air, I already knew the truth. I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. Because if Petrov and Richter were responsible for Tony's death, then I'd spent 20 years punishing myself for their crime. And that meant I had a score to settle. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Tony's face, not the confident grin he wore in the locker room before a match, but the look in his eyes after he hit the mat that night in Vegas. The way they went glassy. The way his chest stopped moving. Now I knew there were two men out there who might have made that happen on purpose. And they'd been walking free, running gyms, shaking hands, building reputations, while I hid in the shadows carrying their sin. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't charging into this like I would have in my 20s. No threats, no public call-outs. If Petrov and Richter had ties to the same kinds of people Eddie claimed, rushing in with fists would get me nowhere, and maybe get me buried. This had to be precise. Quiet. Controlled. I started with Richter. A little digging, nothing fancy, just the kind of research anyone could do, told me he'd recently opened a new location of his gym franchise 2 hours south of Denver. His social media was full of opening day photos, him grinning in a suit, posing with local fighters, shaking hands with city officials. I drove down on a Tuesday afternoon. The place was in a strip mall wedged between a discount furniture outlet and a vape shop. The front windows were plastered with posters advertising cardio kickboxing, kids martial arts, and self-defense seminars. Inside, the air smelled like fresh paint and ambition. The front desk was manned by a young guy in his early 20s, probably a student himself. "Here for a trial class?" he asked. "Something like that," I said, scanning the place. In the back, through a glass wall, I could see the main training area, thick mats, a boxing ring, heavy bags along the far wall. And there he was. Cal Richter hadn't aged gracefully. He was thicker now, his once lean fighter's build padded with years of comfort. But his eyes were still sharp, and his voice carried that same condescension I remembered from our brief encounters years ago. He was correcting a young student's stance, his tone dripping with fake patience. The kid nodded nervously, clearly eager to please. When Richter finally noticed me, his gaze lingered for a second too long. I knew the moment he recognized me. The faintest flicker of surprise crossed his face before he smoothed it over with a smile. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, walking over. "If it isn't Silent Storm. Or should I say, Janitor Storm now? I let the insult slide. Heard you were running a new place. Thought I'd stop by." He chuckled. "To what do I owe the honor? Looking for a job? I could always use someone to mop the mats." I stepped in closer, close enough that only he could hear me. "I'm looking for answers. About Tony Rodriguez." For just a moment, his smirk faltered. It was quick, but I saw it, the tiny hitch in his breathing, the way his eyes darted toward the back office. "Not sure what you mean," he said smoothly, but his voice was a fraction tighter. "You will be," I said, turning toward the door. "We'll talk again soon." I left without looking back. But I could feel his eyes on me the whole way out. That reaction told me enough. Richter knew something. And now he knew I was coming for it. Richter didn't wait long to respond. 2 nights after my visit to his gym, I was locking up the Denver facility after hours. The place was empty, Derek had left an hour earlier, Sarah had gone home, and I was doing my usual rounds with the mop and bucket. I was halfway through wiping down the mirrors when I heard the back door open. No knock, no call out, just the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps coming down the hall. When the figure stepped into the light, I knew he wasn't here to sign up for a membership. He was mid-30s, maybe, built like a bouncer, thick neck, heavy shoulders, a long coat that hung open just enough for me to see the weight of a pistol tucked at his hip. His hair was shaved close, his eyes cold and flat. "You James Washington?" he asked. I kept my voice calm. "Depends who's asking." He smirked faintly. Someone who says you've been asking the wrong questions. My boss wants you to stop. I didn't need a name to know who his boss was. Let me guess, I said. About 6 feet, mid-50s, used to be a gatekeeper fighter before he got lazy and decided to build gyms instead? The smirk faded. You're smarter than you look. That's good. Means you'll understand this next part. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. Drop Tony Rodriguez. Forget Cal Richter. Stay in your lane. I met his eyes. And if I don't? He leaned in just enough for me to smell his breath, cheap coffee and cigarettes. Then the next time we meet, I won't be talking. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could tell he was used to intimidation working. But I wasn't 22 anymore, ready to throw fists at the first sign of disrespect. I'd learned the value of letting a man believe he'd made his point, until you were ready to return it tenfold. I nodded once. Tell your boss I heard him. The man gave a satisfied grunt, turned, and walked out the way he came. The moment the door shut, I set the mop down and went to the small office in the back. Inside was a file cabinet where I kept a few personal things. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a worn leather notebook. It was Tony's. I'd kept it all these years, never opening it because I didn't think I could bear to. But now I needed every scrap of memory, every lead. I flipped through the pages, training notes, diet logs, sparring schedules, until I found something in the back. A single page, written just weeks before he died. Cal and Petrov both approached me again. Told them no. Feel like they're watching me now. Can't shake it. I closed the notebook slowly. Richter's messenger had just confirmed it without meaning to. They were scared. And scared men make mistakes. I didn't sleep that night. The page from Tony's notebook burned in my mind. Can't shake it. I could almost hear his voice saying it, low and uneasy. He'd known they were circling him. And I'd been too focused on the fight to see it. That wasn't going to happen again. If Richter thought sending muscle to warn me would scare me off, he'd miscalculated. I'd learned something from the old fight days: when your opponent presses forward, sometimes the best counter isn't to retreat, but to step in. So I decided to step in hard. The next afternoon, I drove back to Richter's gym. No appointment, no call ahead. I walked in through the front, past the same young guy at the desk. Is Cal in? I asked. He hesitated. He's in a private session. I didn't wait for him to finish. I pushed through the glass door into the main mat area. Richter was there, working with 2 adult students. When he saw me, his movements faltered. He straightened slowly, forcing a smile for the class. Hey, folks, take 5. The students stepped off the mat. The room went quiet except for the dull thud of a heavy bag being hit in the corner. I told you to stop, Richter said, his voice low. I walked onto the mat, closing the distance between us. And I told you we'd talk again. He glanced toward the office like he was hoping for backup, but the room was empty. Cal, I said, keeping my voice steady, I know about the threats to Tony. I know you and Petrov approached him to throw a fight. I know he said no. And I know he was being watched before he died. His face stayed still, but his breathing gave him away. You don't know a damn thing. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the notebook. Tony wrote it down. Your name. Petrov's name. Weeks before he died. For a flicker of a second, his mask cracked. Then the smirk returned. Even if that's true, Storm, you think anyone's gonna take your word for it after 20 years? You're a washed-up has-been. I'm a respected gym owner. I took a step closer until there were only inches between us. Respected gym owners don't send hired goons to threaten old fighters in the middle of the night. His eyes narrowed. Here's how this works now, I continued. You're going to sit down with me and Maria. You're going to tell us everything about that night, every deal, every threat, every name. If you don't, I'll make sure the truth gets out in a way you can't control. He laughed once, short and sharp. You think you can scare me with your reputation? I didn't blink. No, Cal. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just giving you a chance to walk out of this with something left. For the first time, I saw it, the calculation in his eyes shifting. Not fear exactly, but the understanding that I wasn't bluffing. Give me a day, he said finally. I'll think about it. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. One day, Cal. Then I come looking for you again. And next time, we won't be talking in private. When I stepped outside into the cold air, I felt the familiar tension in my chest, the same one I'd felt before stepping into the ring. Only this time, it wasn't for a fight under bright lights. This was something darker, quieter. And I had a feeling Cal Richter wasn't the only one watching me now. Cal didn't wait the full day. That night, around 11:30, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct told me to answer. Storm, the voice said, low, gravelly, deliberate. It's Cal. We need to talk. Not here. Not my gym. Neutral ground. I leaned back in my chair. Where? Warehouse off 48th and Brighton. You'll see my truck out front. Come alone. My gut tightened. That was no neutral ground, it was an invitation to a setup. But something in his tone, it wasn't confident. It was rushed, almost panicked. I decided to go, but on my terms. The warehouse was an old shipping depot, long abandoned, the kind of place you could shout in and hear your own echo 3 times. Cal's truck was parked near a side door, engine still warm. Inside, the air smelled of dust and rusted metal. Cal was pacing near a stack of pallets, his phone in one hand, a cigarette in the other. When he saw me, he ground the cigarette under his heel and shoved the phone in his pocket. You didn't give me much time, I said. Yeah, well, time's the problem, he replied, glancing toward the shadows as if expecting someone to step out. Petrov knows you're sniffing around. He's not happy. I crossed my arms. That's supposed to scare me? It should, Cal said, his voice sharp. You think I'm the worst of it? Petrov doesn't play by gym rules. If he wants you gone, you're gone. No cameras, no questions. Just gone. So what's this? A warning? Or are you finally ready to tell the truth? He exhaled hard, the sound almost a growl. Tony, he was clean, you know. Too clean. Petrov hated that. Said fighters like him made the rest of us look bad. When Tony wouldn't take the dive, Petrov told me to handle it. I refused at first. And then? And then Petrov sent a couple guys to the locker room before your sparring session. Said they just wanted to talk sense into him. Whatever they did, by the time he stepped on the mat, he was off. Slower. I could see it. Why didn't you stop it? I asked, my voice hardening. Cal's eyes dropped. Because Petrov was watching me too. I wasn't ready to burn that bridge. And then Tony went down, and it was done. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the faint creak of the building settling. Why tell me now? I asked. Because Petrov knows I talked to you the other day, Cal said, his voice dropping even lower. And he sent me a message. Not for you, for me. I didn't like the sound of that. What kind of message? He turned his head slightly, and in the dim light I saw the bruise along his jaw, half hidden under stubble. That kind. For a moment, I almost believed he wanted to help. Almost. Then a slow, deliberate set of footsteps echoed through the far end of the warehouse. Heavy boots on concrete. Cal froze. From the shadows, a tall figure emerged, broad shoulders, shaved head, a thick neck corded with muscle. Even after all these years, I knew him instantly. Viktor Petrov. His eyes locked on me, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Silent storm," he said in that deep Russian accent. "It has been too long." Petrov's presence filled the warehouse like a storm rolling in, slow, heavy, and impossible to ignore. He walked with the kind of confidence that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted, his thick black coat shifting with each step. The boots stopped about 10 feet from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I see the internet has made you famous again," Petrov said, his voice deep and deliberate. "A janitor who makes a black belt fly. Very impressive." I didn't take my eyes off him. "Impressive enough to make you nervous?" His faint smile didn't falter. "Nervous? No. Curious, maybe. I thought you had buried yourself in some quiet life. But now you are asking questions. Dangerous questions." Cal shifted uncomfortably beside me, but Petrov's gaze never moved from mine. "You were there the night Tony Rodriguez died," I said evenly. "You approached him about taking a dive. He said no. And suddenly, he's moving slow, and he's dead on the mat." Petrov's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, just enough for me to know the hit landed. "Careful, Storm," he said. "It is one thing to tell stories to yourself in the dark. Another to speak them aloud where they can be misunderstood." "Misunderstood by who?" I asked. "The people you still work for? The ones who send guys to locker rooms to do your dirty work?" The air between us was tight, electric. Petrov stepped forward slowly, each step deliberate until he was close enough for me to see the faint scar along his cheek, a souvenir from our fight all those years ago. "You think I fear you because you beat me once," he said. "That was a fight. This is different. This is business. And in business, I don't care who is in front of me. If they are in my way, I remove them." His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the truth in it. I took a half step closer, matching his proximity. "Then you'd better be sure I'm in your way. Because if I am, I don't move." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Behind him, in the shadows, I saw 2 other men, big, silent, watching. His insurance policy. Petrov finally leaned back, breaking the tension. "You want answers about Rodriguez? You will not get them from me. Some things are better left where they are buried." I glanced at Cal. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maybe for you," I said. "But I've been buried for 20 years. And I'm done digging my own grave." Petrov's smile returned, but colder this time. "Then I suppose we will see who ends up in the ground first." With a flick of his head, he turned, his 2 men falling in behind him. The echo of their footsteps faded into the dark until only Cal and I remained. "You just made yourself a target," Cal said quietly. I shook my head. "No, Cal. He just confirmed he's guilty." And now I had exactly what I needed, the certainty to take this all the way, no matter where it ended. I didn't have weeks. I didn't even have days. If Petrov knew I was pushing, he'd either disappear or make sure I did. That meant my only chance was to pull the fight onto ground of my choosing, somewhere he couldn't bury the truth in shadows. I called Maria the next morning. "Get Sarah. Tell her to bring her phone and as much battery as she can carry. We're going to need witnesses." By late afternoon, we had the plan set. Derek, still desperate to repair his own reputation, agreed to host a special seminar at the gym. We spread the word through social media and text chains, inviting students, local trainers, even a few small-time promoters. The hook was simple: James "Silent Storm" Washington was giving a talk on respect and discipline in martial arts. Petrov liked attention. He'd show up just to see what I was doing. And when he did, he wouldn't be able to help himself. The turnout was bigger than I expected, 30 people filling the mat area, phones ready, the buzz of anticipation humming in the air. I stood in the center, speaking about discipline, about what martial arts should mean. The words were honest, but my eyes were on the door. Right on cue, it opened. Petrov walked in like he owned the place, two of his shadows behind him. Cal trailed in moments later, looking like a man walking into his own sentencing. "Viktor Petrov," I said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Glad you could make it. We were just talking about integrity in the fight world." A ripple went through the crowd. Sarah had her phone up, lens pointed straight at him. Petrov's smile was tight. "You have a lot to say, Storm. Maybe too much." "Then set the record straight," I said, stepping closer. "Tell them what happened to Tony Rodriguez." The room went still. Petrov's gaze swept the crowd, calculating. "Rodriguez died in an accident. That is all." I held up Tony's notebook. "He wrote your name. Cal's name. Weeks before he died. He said he was being watched. Threatened. And you were in the building the night he collapsed." Phones were out now, recording every word. Petrov noticed. His jaw tightened. "You're chasing ghosts," he said. I took another step, voice steady. "Then why did you send men to talk sense into him before his last spar? Why was he dizzy before we even touched gloves? Why was Cal told to handle it if he didn't take the dive?" Cal's eyes darted around the room. He was sweating. Petrov's gaze landed on him like a blade. "Cal?" I said. "Tell them." For a long, agonizing moment, Cal didn't move. Then, slowly, he looked at Maria, then Sarah, then the crowd. His voice shook. "It's true." Petrov ordered it. I didn't stop it. And I've been running from it ever since. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, phones flashing. Petrov stepped forward, but two students blocked his path. "You just buried yourself, Cal," Petrov growled. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You buried yourself the night you killed my friend. Today, you just got caught." Sarah's phone never wavered. Every word, every expression, every flicker of guilt was streaming live to hundreds of viewers, and growing. Petrov's control finally cracked. He turned, shoving past the crowd, his shadows following fast. But it didn't matter. The video was already out. By nightfall, it had gone viral. By morning, fight forums, news outlets, and even law enforcement were buzzing with the story. Cal turned himself in, handing over names, dates, and details that tied Petrov to more than just Tony's death. 3 months later, Petrov was under investigation in 3 countries. His empire was crumbling. As for me, I didn't go back to hiding. I stayed at the gym, not as a janitor, but as an instructor. Not teaching people how to win fights, but how to fight for what matters. The last time I stepped off the mat after class, Maria was there. "Tony would have been proud," she said. I nodded. "I just wish it hadn't taken me 20 years to do it." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes justice moves slow. But it still moves." And for the first time in decades, the weight in my chest felt lighter. In the end, this story wasn't about a black belt being humbled by a janitor. It wasn't even about me stepping back into a fight after 20 years. It was about truth, and the price of letting it stay buried. For 2 decades, I carried a weight that wasn't mine. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't erase the past, but it gave it meaning. As Tony's sister said, sometimes justice moves slow. But it still moves. And when it does, it's up to us to make sure it keeps going. If this story made you think about respect, about standing up when it's easier to stay silent, then share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories that echo with truth, and let someone else hear this before they need it most.